Konstantin Kisin, of trigonometry fame, asks a very simple but important question.
Is Islam a religion of peace?
And I was impressed by his answer. I've been responding to this question for more than 2 decades now, and I can say that Konstantin Kisin has something very, very relevant to add, especially for those of us in the West, and especially for our leaders. Let's go through some of this. Konstantin begins by framing the issue in terms of mass immigration.
The rise of anti-immigration parties across Europe is not a response to mass immigration per se. It's a response to the importation of large numbers of people from what even the bravest of our politicians euphemistically call incompatible cultures. To them, the problem is not immigration, it's Islam.
So, anti-immigration parties are popping up all over Europe. But the real issue isn't immigration, it seems to be Islam. Konstantin goes on to point out that in Europe, there are tons of immigrants from countries around the world, and yet there isn't much hostility towards most immigrants from various countries because they're not causing problems. Problems seem to come from one particular source. So, what are the different ways of addressing this issue?
There are 3 broad schools of thought on this issue. The progressive response is the head-in-the-sand mantra of diversity is our greatest strength. The slogan, mindlessly repeated, is a proxy for a whole host of dishonesties.
And now he goes through the progressive ways of responding to the problem.
First, and for as long as possible, they will pretend that there is no problem. When Islamist terrorism is discussed, they will immediately try to contextualize the debate by talking about far-right violence and other threats.
So, if you complain about jihad, they will instantly point to the dangers of the far right. But that's simply dishonest because statistics show where the problem lies.
75% of MI5's caseload involves Islamist terrorism, with over 90% of the 43,000 people on MI5's terror watch list being Islamist extremists.
If Islam isn't the problem, how do you explain these numbers?
To understand this in its actual context, consider that only 6% of people in Britain are Muslim. In other words, Islamist extremism is not only a huge problem, it's a disproportionately huge problem.
Muslims are a small percentage of the British population, but a huge percentage of the people on terror watch lists. Why is that? Coincidence?
Second, once people who hold this view are forced to confront some measure of reality and accept the problem exists, they will pivot to blaming causes like poverty, discrimination, alienation, and so on. They will ignore the fact that other groups in our society suffer from these problems and do not engage in terrorism, mass rape, gangs, or sectarian violence.
Did you catch that? When confronted with statistics, progressives will blame something else for the correlation. It's because of poverty or discrimination. But other groups face poverty and discrimination. Why aren't these other groups massively overrepresented on terror watch lists?
Third, they will immediately accuse anyone who attempts to look for solutions of being racist, Islamophobic, and so on.
Yes, when all else fails, just call people racists, bigots, and Islamophobes.
This package of lies, combined with the reality of the problem itself, has given rise to the second, and in some ways, equal and opposite school of thought. According to this perspective, the problem is not Islamism, it's Islam itself.
This would be my perspective. Islam is the problem, because Islam's most trusted sources are filled with commands and claims that lead to the problems we see. For example, Surah 5, verse 51. O you who believe, take not the Jews and the Christians as awliya, friends, protectors, helpers. They are but awliya of each other. And if any amongst you takes them as awliya, then surely he is one of them. Verily, Allah guides not those people who are the zalimun, polytheists and wrongdoers and unjust. So don't take Jews or Christians as friends, protectors, or helpers. If you do, you're a Jew or a Christian, not a Muslim. Surah 9, verse 29. Fight against those who believe not in Allah nor in the last day, nor forbid that which has been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, Muhammad, and those who acknowledge not the religion of truth, i.e. Islam, among the people of the scripture, Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So Allah commands his followers to fight us until we pay tribute money, called jizya, with willing submission and feel ourselves subdued. What's jizya? Here's the commentary. Paying jizya is a sign of kufr, unbelief, and disgrace. Allah said, until they pay the jizya, if they do not choose to embrace Islam, with willing submission, in defeat and subservience, and feel themselves subdued, disgraced, humiliated, and belittled. One more. Surah 98, verse 6. Verily, those who disbelieve in the religion of Islam, the Quran, and Prophet Muhammad, from among the people of the scripture, Jews and Christians, and al-mushrikun, mushrikun are people who associate partners with Allah, will abide in the fire of hell. They are the worst of creatures. According to the Quran, Jews and Christians are the worst of creatures. We're lower than dogs, we're lower than pigs, we're lower than insects. There are tons of passages like these in the Quran and the Hadith. Doesn't mean there aren't plenty of Muslims who ignore them or reinterpret them. But there are plenty of Muslims who don't ignore them or reinterpret them. And that's a problem.
To this camp, the fact that most Muslims are decent, peaceful people is irrelevant because to this view, they are so in spite of the teachings of their religion.
In other words, lots of Muslims not following violent commands of the Quran doesn't mean these violent commands of the Quran aren't a problem, especially when there are Muslims who do follow these violent commands of the Quran. So it makes sense to point to Islam as the problem. But Konstantin has an objection to this reasoning.
The problem I've always had with this argument, though, is that there are many countries around the world which are majority Muslim, and some with large Muslim minorities like Singapore, which appear to have dealt with Islamist extremism far better than we have in Western Europe.
There are Muslim majority countries that don't have the terror attacks or the grooming gangs or the other issues we're facing. So if Islam is the problem, why isn't Islam the problem in these other countries? This leads Konstantin to the third perspective. Again, the first perspective is that there is no problem with Islam. The second perspective is that Islam is the problem, but there's a third perspective.
While remaining open-minded to different perspectives and claiming no expertise, I lean towards the third camp, people who believe that religious extremism is a problem which has a tried and tested solution.
Religious extremism is a problem, but there's a tried and tested solution. This perspective doesn't deny that the teachings of the Quran are a problem. It simply points out that other nations have shown how to deal with the problem, which means that if Western nations have the problem, it's because they're not dealing with the problem the way other nations have. And Konstantin focuses primarily on Uzbekistan because he used to live there. Almost 95% of the people of Uzbekistan are Muslims, but there's very little Islamic extremism. You don't see many women in burqas, women wear jeans, you can buy alcohol, jihadis aren't running around trying to subjugate the non-Muslims. If Islam is the problem, why isn't it such a big problem in Uzbekistan or in certain other countries with Muslim majority populations? Konstantin offers an answer, and I think he's right.
There is no serious problem with radical Islam here because the people in charge understand the threat and are prepared to deal with it.
The reason Islam isn't a serious threat in places like Uzbekistan is that the leaders understand the threat and are prepared to deal with it. If you start calling for jihad in your mosque, the leaders are going to make you stop. If you start some grooming gangs, the leaders are going to crush you. If you try to impose the burqa on women, the leaders aren't going to let you. That's the difference between places like Uzbekistan and places like the UK. In the UK, leaders don't understand the problem, and they're not prepared to deal with it. Islamists thrive in an atmosphere of ignorance and cowardice. They don't thrive where leaders recognize the problem and aren't afraid to deal with it. So, The problem in Western nations that can't seem to stop the Islamists isn't just the Islamists. The problem is that the Islamists are free to run wild due to ignorance and cowardice. And I think we can all agree that Konstantin is right. Before we close out, I just want to add that part of the reason places like Uzbekistan have leaders who understand the threat and are willing to deal with it is that they have a strong culture. A strong culture isn't going to look the other way when a threat emerges. Western nations used to have a strong culture. People were willing to stand up for what they believed in. Then we were all taught to despise our own culture. This led to weak leaders who think we're so bad we deserve to be subjugated. And once your society absorbs that idea, you are doomed unless you change it. This is one of the reasons I've been promoting Artsa for the past few months. Believe it or not, some people in some places guard their traditions. They value them. They're not ashamed of them. They fight for them. They want to share their traditions with others. They dedicate their lives to preserving their values and their traditions and their culture. And that's why their values and their traditions and their culture remain. They don't fade away. I've been telling you about Artsa because I really like what they do, especially when I see entire nations doing the opposite. There are Christian and Jewish small businesses in Israel which take a hit after every terror attack because tourism plummets. Tens of thousands of small businesses closed in 2024 because there was almost no tourism. Artsa dealt with the problem by gathering products from local artisans in Jerusalem and Nazareth and Bethlehem and other locations and shipping them around the world. We should respect and encourage their resilience by signing up for a quarterly Artsa box. They're not very expensive, especially considering what you're getting and how many people you're helping. There's a link to the Artsa website in the description box. Use the promo code DIZZLE to get a discount and to let them know who sent you. If you'd like to watch the full trigonometry video, that link is also in the description box. Be sure to share it so you can help other people confront the civilization-ruining challenges of ignorance and weak leaders.